It's really good to be here all together today in the gym of the Reed Center, which is going to be renovated starting in what, 10 days?
Yes.
10 days. So this is going to all change. We're the last event, we think, in the Reed Center. So
Yeah. Is it going to have a different name?
Is it going to have a different name?
I don't think so.
No, same thing. The new Reed Center.
The new Reed Center.
I was joking with Dwayne about burying some time capsules in the wall or something. Yeah, that walls probably will be taken up. So I'm Zev Friedman, and here's Dylan Riles Hamilton. And I also want to point out Michelle Smith, who's both on our panel and an organizer of the class with us. And what this is here today is a panel that's a part of the Permaculture in Action class. And the Permaculture in Action class is something that Dylan and I dreamed up last year. It was basically our best attempt at taking what's called permaculture, which I'll talk about in a second, to the next level of accessibility and having a greater effect and presence in this community and in the world. And this class is an attempt to do a few different things at once, which is kind of a theme in permaculture, is things having multiple functions. And the class is an attempt to make a very low-cost, accessible class format for students. It was $275 to $325 for a 10-day class, as well as very affordable permaculture installation for landowners, installing elements of permaculture systems so the landowners pay in as well. And that combination allows landowners to get affordable installation of permaculture elements and students to get an affordable hands-on class, which was what everybody was clamoring for. It was hands-on. So we're doing all kinds of things in this class. Tomorrow we'll be inoculating mushroom logs and planting a bamboo and black locust guild that's going to provide a site block and craft materials at a client's place. And we're putting in duct systems and ponds and photovoltaic pumps and all kinds of different things as part of the class. And so those things the students are all getting hands-on experience doing, as well as the bigger picture of permaculture, and then the landowners get their work done. So that's,
you can like us on Facebook,
like
Permaculture in Action 2012.
Yeah, and so what this is, though, for us, this is not even just a business model or a class model. It's because we really care about helping and the earth to get to a next stage where we know how to meet our needs, meet the needs of the people, keep the earth alive, and have meaningful work for people to do that is engaged in doing that work. So this is our hope, that things like this class can begin to be a catalyst for that greater cause and that greater movement. And you all here are part of that today. And so that's what this panel is about. I want to talk about permaculture before I go into that, though. Permaculture is just a word, really, but it has a lot of layers of meaning to it. A definition for permaculture can be a design system for creating regenerative human habitat. And we could go into what each of those words means and everything, but in its essence, it's something that allows us to design any system. Usually it's land, but also it can be businesses, social systems, relationships of all kinds. There are these principles in permaculture that train us to think in a whole systems way that links together needs and kind of makes a linked together system where everything works together like in a natural ecosystem. And so that's what we're attempting to do all the time in permaculture in different ways, and especially on landscapes. And that's why we have this panel here today, because although only one of the people, Patricia Allison, on the panel would call herself probably a professional permaculturalist, each of these people on the panel we have seen and been watching in the community and have recognized as systems thinkers, people who link together different communities and different needs that need to be met and creatively get them all working together. And so each of these people is doing that in a unique way, and in a way we think that that's the next kind of growing up stage of permaculture, is to get it past just the people who call themselves permaculturalists and recognize that really there are people all around the world who know how to do this and call it different things, and try to get more people thinking in this way, linking together groups of people and doing things in the world that need to be done. So we think that they're all doing this. And it's a great honor to have them all here. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dylan.
Thanks. Yes, so like Zev was saying, permaculture is typically thought of as a method or a philosophy for connecting the various elements of a system. And so, But what we're kind of trying to do here is bring that out to an even broader scale and try to connect various systems to each other. So I'll give you an example, and I'm talking about social systems and community networks. So there's an organization called the Pisgah View Peace Gardens. It's in a housing project, and they grow food for the project and for the community at large, and they have a big garden. There's also a system, a community system, a network called the Asheville Independent Restaurant Association. Well, before Gordon Smith initiated the Food Policy Council, those two organizations may never have met and may never have spoken to one another. But because the Food Policy Council exists and all these people were able to get in the same room together, now we have two systems, two networks of people that are communicating, and in fact a lot more than two. Those are just two examples of many of the organizations that are at the Food Policy Council, right? So we face some pretty serious challenges in the world today, as I'm sure most of the people here are aware of. There's rising fuel costs, climate chaos, the instability of the global economy, and all these things. And these huge challenges require coordinated action, coordinated efforts. So there's a movement called the Transition Movement, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the founder of that movement was actually a permaculture teacher, and he started thinking this way. And he has a quote that I really like to share every time I get the opportunity, which is, if we wait for governments to act, it will be too little and too late. If we try to act as individuals to face these challenges, it'll be too little. But if we act as a community, it might be just enough, just in time. So what we're talking about here is not just how to, we could look at examples of how a community might coordinate on a permaculture effort, like how a community might, share rainwater off of each other's roofs so that the roof on the top of the hill is feeding rainwater down to water the gardens for the house below it, and that house is feeding the house below it, and so on and so on. We might talk about community scale efforts to create like an energy co-op where they invest in solar panels or windmills or something like that to have a community energy grid. But what we're trying to get at here is actually something even deeper. We're not just talking about the how to do it, but the how to include all of the individuals and people that are out there to make a cohesive effort. So in nature, in a natural, healthy ecosystem, every element in the system, every living thing in that ecosystem is fed by and feeds another part of the system. There's no such thing as waste. But in our society, we have waste people. I mean, we have people that we treat like waste. People who are homeless and jobless and unemployed and considered, are marginalized by our community. Even the elderly who get sent away and put in homes. Things like this. All these institutions, prisons, so on. So we're talking about how to reinforce those connections and reconnect all the people and the elements in our system. And that's a big part of what we're trying to get at today. So, since we're trying to take this on to a more social level, I'll give a couple of quick examples before we turn it over to the panelists. But there are a lot of organizations that have this kind of thinking already, and some great ones that are here, and that's why we've invited these folks here today. There's an organization called City Repair in Oregon, and what they do is they'll get a whole neighborhood on board together to do what they call intersection repair. They'll paint a whole intersection, make it really bright and visible, and they'll put up kiosks so there's informational boards and things like that. And what they're doing it's not so much about what they're doing on the ground, even though they're doing this in sustainable ways, using natural building materials to build their kiosks and things like that. What they're really doing is they're getting a community to create a common space so that the members of the community have more of a venue to connect with each other and communicate with each other, that sort of thing. So I teased you a little bit by talking about transition, so I'll fill you in on that for anybody who's not aware. And there is a Transition Asheville, but this is a global movement that operates on a grassroots level. And it was begun, as I said, by a permaculture teacher named Rob Hopkins. And back in the UK, just a few years ago. It's a relatively very new movement, and it's kind of a social experiment. And what it is, it's a community model for communities to get together and begin to address how are we going to face these issues of rising fuel costs, climate chaos, instability of the global economy. How are we going to create a more localized and more resilient community? And now there are 400 and something officially recognized transition initiatives in the world. Transition Asheville became number 88 in the U.S. When was that? Spring a year ago, right? So if you're interested in Transition Asheville, there's a number of people here I know who are involved. If you don't mind raising your hands, so other folks can know who to talk to if you want to learn more. And
Transition Black Mountain and Transition Hendersonville is also happening.
Thank you.
Just to know.
Thank you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. I just want to say all those slips of paper that got passed around, for anyone who didn't hear, those are for you to write questions down as we go along if you want to write one question. And then Adam, will you raise your hand? Stand up. Adam's going to take up those slips. We're going to allow the panelists to introduce themselves and talk about what it is that they do. We're going to start with Dwayne and move that way. And about the time we get to maybe Tom, Adam is going to start taking those slips of paper up, and we'll try to do that with as little distraction as possible. So if you want to, yeah, Zev? Just
another point, I realized a flaw is we are sending around the contact sheet before you have a chance to be impressed by the wonderful panelists. So we'll send it around again after we've been through towards the end, so you can now sign up to all of them, because you're going to be so blown away by all these organizations.
Yeah, I'm wondering who they're not going to be impressed by. I mean, come on. I'm impressed by them. I'm right.
Yeah, so with that, we'll turn it over to our panelists. We'll start with you, Dwayne.
Good morning, my name is Dwayne Barton. I'm the co-founder and co-director of Green Opportunities. And Green Opportunities is a green jobs training program, but we really try to focus in the very communities where we want to do the work. And those communities, the communities that sometimes are considered like waste or forgotten. And my word for permaculture is called the hustle. So I also volunteered for this program called Read to Succeed. It's a program that goes into elementary schools and try to teach young people on how to read phonics. In certain, in the communities we work in, before we can reach out to other communities and other organizations, those particular communities have to heal. And they have to develop relationships with themselves and understand the value that they bring to each other. And a lot of times, because you say the history or the pattern of neglect and lack of value, there's an enormous amount of distrust that has grown in those communities for a long time, and it's just continuing to carry on. So with Green Opportunities, we have a real hustle and a real challenge to deal with, because we see the opportunity throughout the community, and we want the communities we work in to be a part of that opportunity. But it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult. So we actually have to go out and create like monuments. Let it be the PVA garden in Pisgah-View. Let it be a bench or a stool, or let it be a piece of art in the different communities to help remind people. Let it be kiosks about what we're trying to do. And our greatest thing is training people and giving them a job or work. So when they walk through their community and they was once the dope boy or they was once somebody that everybody didn't want to trust, and they see them with the shirt on, they know that they working in and around the community, and their community and out is like the most popular commercial we could ever have. And as an organization, we started over in Burton Street in a community center. We developed a relationship with the city. We had a relationship with those particular people before, but the greatest relationship came within the community itself. And how do you do that when it's been through gentrification, it's been through a crack hurricane, it's been through all these things, and you gotta reach people, then you gotta listen to them, and then you gotta say, believe in this possibility, this future dream for cleaning up Nasty Branch, and restoring this building right here to a green jobs training facility. Now this right here is a dream for us, because we started in the backyard of someone's house, and now this is our future home. So it's like, how do you get people to see the bigger picture when their immediate picture is so bleak?
Hey ho. Hey ho.
That's it.
Want to give me 5 minutes? You want to tell me when 5 minutes? Because I'm... my name is Patricia Allison, and I've been teaching permaculture for 18 years. I've been studying it for over 20 years. I live at Earth Haven Eco Village, which is about an hour away from here. So in a lot of ways, me and Dwayne are sitting on the opposite sides of the permaculture equation, because I come from the place of the privileged white folks. So let's just talk about that and be real clear instead of everybody kind of noticing. We're coming from opposite ends of the street here. How do we get those opposite ends of the street to talk to each other? And in fact, actually, they're not opposite. We're here. There's those 1% and 2%ers that are over there, and they've got all the money to fund us. And frankly, that is really, really, really a huge thing that I just want to tell the truth about. All of this stuff is deep. We're trying to create sustainable systems, but we're also trying to sustain our very bodily existence by working at a job or whatever we're doing. And we're all, I reckon everybody sitting in this line right here anyway, are burning our candles at more than 2 ends. And it isn't enough. And so I just want to say right out loud, anybody knows any rich folks, go knock on their door. Anybody's got any grant writing skills, go find some funding to get this education into people's lives. It's the most valid, important work that anyone can be doing right now. And Dwayne and I were just talking about, he's working with the post-high school folks, and we're both agreeing, where does this education need to start? It needs to start in kindergarten. We have to start raising those babies so that they know where food comes from. And daddy or mommy doesn't wander off to some place called work every day and abandon them to a bunch of crazy people. So we have to start at the bottom to fix our system. We're going to talk about techniques of water collection and food integration and all that. At the same time, we've got to start at the very bottom foundation of looking at our soil and our children. So there, that was my spontaneous reaction to Dwayne's piece, and then I'm going to say what I was going to say, which is, I want to talk a little bit about, I'm coming from the perspective of the intentional community. I live in an intentional community, and I just want to, so the topic here is it takes a village to raise abundance, which means you have to be happy enough to want to shake your buns. So we want to have that village, that community, to make us feel that way. Why did we go buy 320 acres out in the woods? And do I advocate that for everybody else here to do? I bet you can figure out that I don't. I think we did a great job, us Earth Haveners. We did create this amazing thing. Why did we do it? because we wanted to have a big enough scale to affect cultural change. Not just the demonstrations of the straw bale houses and the cob and the solar panels and the chickens and the ducks, but about the cultural change of how can people begin to return to that integrated way of life in which we are truly addressing our human animal needs together as a unit. So that's what village is to me, is us all figuring it out together. So that's why we went out and did that, so we could have a big enough chunk to address cultural needs, and of course to begin doing the physical demonstration. So, okay, Earth Haven is off the grid, permaculture based. We're off the electric grid and the water grid, so we're providing all of that for ourselves. And we are based on, loosely, on permaculture principles. And we are a consensus decision-making group, which I consider to be an absolutely essential piece of permaculture, is to have a culture in which all voices are heard. And that's how I define consensus. Thank you. The biggest challenge, this is my theme, is what our biggest mistake is that we asked too much of ourselves. We expected ourselves to do too much too fast. We expected ourselves to be able to do those two things of still making a living, you know, having to go out and do whatever we do to make a living, and at the same time building an eco-village. And we burnt out, and a lot of interpersonal stuff, a lot of interpersonal pain is the fallout from that, when we're expecting too much of ourselves and each other. So that's like the biggest challenge of trying to do eco-village, is that. I would say the biggest hope I have for what Earth Haven and other intentional communities can do in the world is that we can serve as models. You can come out to Earth Haven, you can see what off-the-grid life looks like on a physical basis. You can begin to learn, and we can share both our errors and our successes so that you don't have to go reinvent the wheel. Because one of the ways that I describe a sustainable city is a mosaic of eco-villages. So we've done this one out in the country, and we want you to come and see it and learn, and then we want to take some of that template and plunk it down into that decentralized city life that we're all sort of yearning for. Thank you.
I think I ended up moving that microphone unnecessarily. I'm Michelle Smith. I live 1 block from here, 2 blocks from here, and on Choctaw Street, right across the street from Nasty Branch. I am the volunteer co-creator of the Linking Waters project, which is what I'm talking about today. It's aimed at reclaiming urban water for jobs, environment, and food, and resilient community. And my home hosts the first demonstration site of the Linking Waters project. My home, I'm creating urban food forest, micro farm, sort of gathering place. It's a very public site. It's right down there, and it's right across the street from the branch. And I just want to live in a healed place. And I want that healed place to be in the South Side and in Asheville. And I got real excited about the idea of restoring and protecting Nasty Branch and having that be something that, a focal point for the community, and that city repair model where it's something the community can do together. And that was kind of my little inspiration and dream, and it spawned all the rest of this, and finally spawned the Linking Waters project. It's a demonstration site. We've installed some very low-tech earthworks features as part of phase 1. And they're designed to capture rainwater and infiltrate it into the soil. And also divert it into the places that we want. I'm going to need a lot of water for a food forest, and so I needed to be capturing all the water that fell, and the best place to store water is in the soil for a lot of different reasons. But the point of phase 1 was to demonstrate things that anybody could do with tools no more complex than a shovel. Phases 2 and 3 will bring in more mid-tech, and by mid-tech we mean things like installing tanks and even putting in cisterns and doing those wonderful ideas. So the point of the demonstration is to begin to measure what could the impact be. So what is could the impacts be on a creek, an urban stream, in terms of sediment runoff and pollution? What could the impacts be on restoring our groundwater levels, which in western North Carolina are alarmingly low? We get a lot of water, but we interrupt the cycle by draining it away as fast as possible. Rainwater then becomes storm water, and it's a problem. If you treat rain like a nuisance, it'll act like one. If you treat rain like a gift, it'll act like that. And so what we wanted to measure was those technical, biological, on-the-ground things. But I wanted to measure the potential for job creation, and the potential for community building, and the potential for increasing and healing relationships between people, neighbors, and between people and land. And so we developed the Linking Waters Project. My co-creator here is Sherry Ingram. She is a geologist. She's the technical advisor. We collaborated with RiverLink, because I was able to get a little bit of grant money to help pay for some materials and some design consulting and a little bit of work, and we put it in. And so the idea of connecting this with the restoration of nasty branches was the real link with RiverLink. So far it has really spawned beautiful collaborations with Transition Asheville, with RiverLink, Permaculture in Action. We got a sponsorship from Asheville Hardware, so that, the idea is to begin to draw business there. But what we really also wanted to measure too, it was really important, was job creation. If we can begin to reclaim our urban water in our neighborhoods, not only can we really have a huge impact on our water situation in Asheville, our food growing situation in Asheville, our environment, our relationships, but we can create a lot of jobs from that landscape level of on-the-ground landscape building, all the way up to higher tech engineering, because we have, we have a lot of hills here, so some features that you want to put in, you're going to need that expertise. So this whole range of jobs that we've identified. And then there's the jobs that come from that, the jobs that come from food production and from scientific measuring and from assessment of sites, assessing the sites for their soil appropriateness and their slope for installing these things.
Michelle, you've got a couple more minutes, and I'd love it if you would talk a little bit about your dream and vision for Peace and Fun Gardens, too.
Okay. I want to say quickly, some of our challenges are that it's kind of just been the two of us kind of doing it, but the beauty is it has attracted lots and lots of attention. We also worked with Asheville Green Opportunities a little bit, and I'd love to see those jobs, the Asheville Green Opportunities community really being the ones who really benefit so much at a large scale from those jobs. The next things that are coming up is the measuring of that. So if you're interested in helping with that measuring, please let me know. Peace and Fun Gardens is my dream for urban food forest and micro farm and gathering place. We plan, have an outdoor kitchen and a little stage and lots of food. And I just think, the world I want to live in the future has two qualities. It's peaceful and it's fun. Yes. And what people have fun when they share food and they share story and they share music and they share community and they share sorrow and they share pain and they share conflict resolution and they bump up against each other. It's at its very beginning stages. Permaculture in Action, it's right down there. Right now it's at a succession stage, so there is a milpa crop. There's an annual crop on it. Eventually it will have a lot more. There's pictures. on the web. You can go to linkingwaters.wordpress.com to find out more. You can go to themichellesmith.org to see more about Peace and Fun Gardens. Please go to Permaculture in Action on Facebook, and you can get to their blog. AVL Permaculture is our Twitter handle. What else do you want me to say about all that? Did I cover what you wanted?
I don't know if you mentioned you have a permaculture design on your...
I do, and you can see the picture. I think at all of those sites. And Zev Friedman, my hero, my angel, who really has, permaculture shifted me from being a person who was an environmentalist to a person who was scared and worried to being a person who is excited and thrilled and into it. And so to see it grow for Asheville into this community scale and to take those principles into that scale, and not just on the land but in our relationships, is just something I can get behind in a big way, and it like heals depression, heals anxiety. It's just it's the greatest thing ever.
Dr. Permaculture.
My name is Tom Noust, and I'm here representing the Buncombe Fruit and Nut Club.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. So I mentioned that Adam was going to be taking up these slips of paper when we got to Tom, but we'll actually have a couple minutes. I've got a couple things I can say so we can make sure that everybody gets to hear from Tom and from Gordon Smith before your questions are due. So if you want to hold off, that's fine. Thanks.
So I'm here representing the Buncombe Fruit and Nut Club and the Western North Carolina Crop Mob. They are two volunteer organizations. I'll start with the Fruit and Nut Club, which we started in the winter of 2010, and basically we are just people who get together around a shared interest, which is fruit and nut trees. And the biggest project that we've kind of dedicated ourselves to is to maintain and improve the 4 edible parks that are in Asheville. There are 2 really mature ones and 2 installations that we've done in the past 2 years. The really great things that we've done is built some great community. There's actually a lot of members of the Fruit and Nut Club that I'm seeing in the audience here. And
Could you ask them to raise their hands?
yeah, if you want to raise your hand, if you're an active member in the Fruit and Nut Club.
Yes, thank you.
Fruit or a nut.
And another really amazing thing is the work that we've accomplished in getting probably 50 or so plants in the ground at these edible park sites. And then we've done field trips, and I refer to them as play days. We get together and mulch and fertilize and prune, and there's a really big emphasis on an educational component for each gathering. So, every time we get together, we'll work for a little bit and then stop, and we've got a huge, diverse skill set in our group, and someone will give a little presentation about water. Sherry gave a great presentation about water at our last one, or pruning demonstrations or things like that. So we're not only getting together and building community around a shared interest, but we're also teaching each other at the same time, which has been really powerful. And then the Crop Mob, which is really exciting. I love it. I read an article about it in the New York Times in the fall of '09. It started in the Piedmont. It was a bunch of interns and farmers who got together, and they wanted to create more community. They're all laboring all day at their farm, but they didn't get to hang out much. There's so much work to do in sustainable agriculture because you're not using big tractors and chemical inputs. So they got together one day and they said, okay, every month we're going to go to each other's farms, and we're going to help each other out for 4 hours, and then the farm will feed us, and then we'll play music and eat food and talk about where we're going to go next. So it's kind of self-perpetuating too, which is really neat. And again, the really great things that have come out of that is this excellent community that we've built, just going to these different farms and the things that we learn from seeing each different site and what people are doing, and the farmers that we've helped, because it's incredible how much you can accomplish with 20 people in 4 hours.
Oh, yes. It really is.
2 weeks worth of work.
Yeah, and our next one will be in June, and if you're interested in hearing about it, just put your name on that list.
All right.
Thanks for inviting me, y'all. Every time lately when I'm having to speak about this, I feel like such a novice, and I am. I think I'm the novice in the room. What's your name? Say again? What's your name? Oh, my name's Gordon Smith. I'm a member of Asheville City Council. I'm also a therapist here in town, and one of the folks who helped to co-found the Asheville Buncombe Food Policy Council. And 15 months ago, I really didn't know diddly about our food systems around here. But I did recognize that in Buncombe County, we've got 55% of our school children on free and reduced lunch, and that we have epidemic rates of obesity and heart disease and diabetes, especially in our poorer communities. We have tons of opportunities in local commerce and local food commerce that haven't been seized. And we've got a vision of sustainability that didn't include how we were going to feed ourselves. There's this big gaping hole in it. And so as I became aware of that, it became clear that we really had to take a look at this. Now, the city was addressing sustainability in different ways, really looking at it from an energy perspective and an affordability perspective. So we have an 80% carbon reduction goal in the city of Asheville. 80% carbon reduction by the year 2030. It's one of the most ambitious, did I get 2030? Did I get that right, Dave? It's one of the most ambitious carbon reduction plans in the country on a municipal scale. And so far we've been hitting our targets on that, exceeding our targets to the point where we actually increased our targets from 2% a year to 4% a year. You may have noticed the new street lights around the city. You may have seen the new street lights. We just replaced all of our old street lights with LEDs. All of them. That's gonna, in addition to all the energy savings, it's gonna save the city $460,000 a year in energy costs. A year. And with that money, rather than just like redistribute that to something else, that's going to get folded right back into our sustainability management plan. So we're going to be reinvesting that money into the future efforts that we're going to have, because right now we're still attacking a lot of the low-hanging fruit as far as energy efficiency goes. But 5 years from now, we're going to have to make some really hard decisions and some really big investments if we're going to hit those goals. And I say 5 years, I'm just spitballing it. I don't know how long it'll take us to get there. But between the Sustainable Advisory Committee, and Dane is here, he's the chair of that committee right now, and the Sustainability Management Department at the city, we're just trying to get a lot of stuff done. Over half our transit fleet now is hybrid buses. We've been expanding our greenways across the city, recognizing that that alternative transportation network is not only going to lower carbon footprint, but allow for increased affordability and better community health. And as far as land use goes, we're trying to, you see the city continue, people keep moving here, moving here, moving here. We're trying to get that density to happen on the corridors where it's already paved. So we're not tearing up more green space, and so we're preventing future sprawl. So these are some of the visions of sustainability that were out there already. And then 15 months ago, I started sitting down with people who knew something about food, Jody Roden and Darcel Edens from Bountiful Cities, and Brandy Boggs, who's with the Roots Project at UNCA, Elufemi Lewis, who lives up at Hillcrest and has been working on their community development up there. And I want to thank all of you for being my teachers over the last year and a quarter as I've tried to wrap my head around this. Zev's right in that I do think of myself as a systems thinker, but things have been illuminated for me over these last 15 months and allowed me to see all of these systems in broader ways and in more integrated ways than I ever have before. And so we started talking about food systems. How am I doing on time? I'm going to go on too long, aren't I?
You're good. You got about 4 more minutes.
Okay, good. We started looking at what was going on here in our deficits within our food system and all of the missed opportunities and all the history. I mean, the Pisgah View Peace Garden isn't new. The Bountiful Cities has 11 different gardens here. The George Washington Carver Edible Park has been there for going on 20 years, I think. Mm-hmm. This is not new stuff. So we started researching, well, how do other communities address these same issues? And what we found is that the ones that were most effective formed food policy councils that were inclusive, that were action-oriented, and that some of them operated within government, some of them operated outside of government. And what we knew is we just needed to get everybody in a room together. And we had to cut across sectors. You couldn't just have the usual suspects in the room. So we reached out to over 50 different organizations in town, organizations that address poverty, public health, local commerce, and what's now become kind of a traditional view of sustainability, focused on energy and some land use stuff. And we convened this food policy council. 95 people turned up, people who've never been in a room together. Government and non-government, individuals and reps of organizations came together and started to talk about, well, what would this look like if we could make this work? We came together again a month later. About 90 people showed up. It wasn't necessarily the same 90 people. A month later, we came together again, finally decided on a structure. I'm going to just briefly describe it to you. There were 8 clusters created, these 8 different focus areas. And I can give you all this information when you sign up on our little sheet. And people could go towards those areas that most interested them, where their passions were, whether it was land use or education or emergency food service or policy and advocacy, the legislative side. So people could kind of choose where their passion was or where their efforts already were and fold in. The Food Policy Council did not create a 501c3 or an LLC or some board of directors. We're not trying to become one more silo in all of these siloed off organizations. We're trying to create an umbrella under which everyone can come and feel ownership. So anyone can attend these cluster meetings and participate. And all this stuff is at the website, abfoodpolicy.com. There's a little calendar there, descriptions of all the clusters. You can see the news. Some of this stuff has already moved through Asheville City Council, and maybe we'll get into that later on. We've actually had some policy pieces already move. And then there are 2 representatives from each of those clusters that come together for the decision-making body that's currently known as the Hub or the General Council. And they're the ones who make these decisions. We don't do voting, not much into voting. Tyrannies of the majority, tyrannies of the minority, all that stuff. And it's not consensus, because that consensus stuff, man, you can get bogged down and stuck forever trying to do consensus. So we took a third way. It's called dynamic governance. And it operates on the basis of consent rather than consensus. The central question it asks is, can you live with this? Not, is it perfect? Can you live with it? Are we moving in the right direction? And it's through that process that we're able to maintain our action orientation. I should probably stop here in a minute, but this has been such an inspiring process. This past Wednesday, well, I'll go back. A week before that, the previous Tuesday, 1 minute? I can do it. Asheville City Council unanimously voted to take this raft of policy proposals, about 40 different policy proposals from the Asheville Buncombe Food Policy Council, and carry them over to the Sustainability Advisory Committee to begin to form a process by which the city can create a plan for food security. This past Wednesday, we went to the Sustainability Advisory Committee, presented this stuff, and at that meeting, the Sustainability Advisory Committee, decided to create kind of a formal liaison between city and the Food Policy Council, B, to direct staff to look at all these policy proposals and see, well, what can we do, what can't we do, what's easy, what's hard. And the third piece was to kind of crack open the whole sustainability plan and say, well, what else have we missed here? We missed food. That was pretty huge. I wonder if we missed some other stuff too.
Water.
So here we go. Here is the community in an integrated way coming to government and saying, let's work together in parallel processes. We're not handing it to government and say, go do it all. We're saying, hey, we're going to work alongside one another to make sure that we can get as far as we can get together. The next step will be to get it to the county so we can make sure that we're really putting everything together as much as we can. I could obviously go on and on, but I'll stop.
Thanks, Gordon. I'm going to move my chair over here so that I'm not yelling in the camera's ear. Yeah, you still have some slips of paper with questions on them? You can make your way toward Adam.
It's a lot of questions.
Maybe pass them down to the front row, if that works. So I just wanted to say really quickly that we were going to have another panelist here, Jeannie Martin, who's a member of Transition Asheville and who used to be on the board of the Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project and several other nonprofit organizations, and is a long-time rock star community activist, environmental activist, permaculturalist. She's an amazing person, and I won't even try to pretend to be able to replace her right now, but I just want to talk for a brief moment about Transition Asheville. Just to say, as I've already mentioned, the transition movement is this community scale model oriented toward dealing on a local level with the issues, these big challenges that we face. But just because there's a Transition Asheville that's like an organization, that doesn't mean that I'm a member of the Transition Asheville Common Table, and it doesn't mean that we think that we are the organization that's going to save Asheville from rising fuel costs and climate chaos and so on, right? So all of these people are doing transition work. Just like, like Zev said, whether they call themselves permaculturalists or not, or whether they even thought they were, thinking like permaculturalists before they came here today, they're thinking like permaculturalists. And they're also thinking like transition people. And so, unfortunately, Transition Asheville couldn't really be strongly represented, but I just want to say, this is the kind of stuff that we're doing. We're trying to engage these conversations, open the floor for people to start networking and communicating with each other, and we're doing the best we can on that. Do any Transition Common Table folks have anything to add to that? Anything? Okay. All right, great.
I'd like to say something.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not even that active in transition, but just what has been done with the Asheville Working Food Policy Council, I think is in a lot of ways a model for what can be done with each of the working group topics in transition. That thorough, engaged, multi-group process could be done, because the end result of the transition movement is supposed to be creating this energy descent plan, which is a plan addressing all sectors of human life: housing, food, water, energy, healthcare, all these things, addressing each of them as thoroughly as the Food Policy Council has addressed food. So that's in a lot of ways a model for doing that. It's a part of transition, even though it wasn't called that. So that's what we're talking about.
Well, and there's so many people in transition who are involved in the Food Policy Council who saw it and were like, oh, that's it. You guys figured it out. We're going to be a part of that. But also, the Land of Sky right now has a process called Grow WNC that's doing a regional sustainability plan that engages all of those areas, that is open right now for you to get involved in. Grow WNC.
Are there 2 W's?
There's 1 W.
I wanted to mention also that an important thing about Transition Town, just like the food policy, is that it is not a governmental effort, but it is not an anti-governmental effort either. So people get together and say, hey y'all, let's take care of our own destiny, and hey, local and other governments, would you like to join us? So it's not an either-or thing, and I think that's important no matter which side of the fence you're standing on, to jump on in.
Thanks for that.
And I'd like to just add one little piece, since we're doing that, that I forgot to get. One of the things that Linking Waters, that came out of Linking Waters, is the idea of Asheville as being the first water sustainable city in the Southeast. And doing that, yes, which means we don't throw any, the goal would be we don't have stormwater. Our water, we keep our water. And so that would happen through a combination of tanks, which people think of tanks now, but tanks really only catch a little bit of water, really. But then the other piece would be earthworks, and the other piece would be plants. And all of that helps our food system, grows jobs, and does, again, this permaculture, whole systems, serving multiple. If you want to know more about the Asheville as a sustainable water city, Sherry Ingram is doing a presentation. Have her come to your group. And you can find that through the linkingwaters.wordpress.com or talk directly.
Thank you. All right, so for the first time ever in the Permaculture in Action class schedule, we are actually about 10 minutes ahead of schedule.
Efficiency.
Which means we have more time to answer all these excellent questions that you all came up with. So, go ahead and get started. First question here is for Gordon Smith. The question is, how can Transition Asheville work effectively with government on food security and creation of jobs in forest agriculture?
In forest agriculture specifically.
That looks like it says in forest agriculture.
Okay, that's why I brought this computer here, because I've got all my little policy pieces all written down here. One of the pieces that the Food Policy Council proposed for the city was to not only to nurture the edible parks we have, but look at a policy where edibles become the norm in all of our parks rather than the exception, where you don't have an edible plant policy, it's just what it is. And so to make that ubiquitous across our parks, and then some of our parks are forest parks like Richmond Hill. I mean, Zev came to me about 3 years ago, I guess, and we were walking through the forest, and he's like, this is a garden. 180 acres. So what I would suggest is to come and be a part of the cluster, of one of the clusters, probably the land use cluster, that's going to be addressing that specifically, and to be able to work within that to help SACE and our Parks Department figure out, okay, well, how do we go from idea to reality?
Is Greenways Parks?
Greenways is parks right now.
So I'm a member of the land use cluster, and I just want to second what Gordon just said. We have dwindling membership because all our members are so involved in so many things, and it's like we're all so busy, and we all keep showing up at these meetings, and we're making stuff happen, but we're getting kind of fried. So we are very open to anybody who wants to come and help us with this great work.
Gordon, if I could just add what you said, Stacey just revised the tree recommendations for developers. Stacey, the Sustainability Commission that Gordon was talking about, we just revised the tree recommendations for developers for the entire city, and we included edible plants and also bee-friendly plants. So that's another aspect.
This next question is for all of the panelists, but particularly Dwayne. So the question is, how can your initiative be started in other places, in other regions? Maybe another way to look at what are the first steps, or what's the most important first thing to get before you start?
We just had these different organizations from all over the state come to Asheville to see green opportunities, our model, and ask the same question. But I think Asheville is sort of unique. There's a lot of, the foundation was good here in Asheville. I mean, you had a lot of stuff going on that I think we brought to conscious the equity part of the green movement. I mean, because we know Asheville has, it's a beautiful place and a lot of consciousness around the environment. And I think what was missing, that the gap for us, was the equity part. So if you go to other cities, if they don't have some foundation work where it's been marinating and you have a conscious people already there, it's going to be a lot more difficult. So we still trying to figure that process out. I mean, I know it's our desire to go down east and go to these different places and start experimenting to see how it works. But I think because Asheville is so unique and had a lot of foundation already, it allowed us to be a lot more effective a lot quicker, because we grew like boom. Once we started, it was in there. So that's my answer.
Anybody else want to take that? Patricia?
Yep. I'd like to speak to how do you start an eco-village in another place, or not, or an intentional community. And I want to point to the prime directive of permaculture, which I think is step one. Prime directive of permaculture is to make the decision to take responsibility for your own life and that of your children, and to make that decision now. So that has to be your underlying desire if you're going to try to create an intentional community, that you're trying to take responsibility for your life and all of its threads. And that brings us to then, okay, where are you going to do it? And I think there's two generic answers. One is bloom where you're planted. That is, create community where you are. But the other is, and we don't say this very often, go move yourself to a place where you can bloom. Because if you're not living in a place where you can bloom, and permaculture will definitely say, we can integrate this and this, but if this and this can't communicate, or if we put a desert plant in our ecosystem, it ain't gonna bloom. So find where you're gonna bloom and try to get yourself there if at all possible, is sort of the generic things. But then I want to just look at a couple of little practical things of how do you start creating intentional community where you are. And there's a few examples. There was in Berkeley, California, what they call the Neighborhood Cooperative Block. And basically it was people living in a block that got to be friends, and then a house came up for sale, so they got together and they bought it. And they turned it into a community house, the child care place and the tool storage and the potluck place and the la. And they simply grew from there, took down all the chain link fences, put the big orchard and the kid center in the center of the block. Eventually it moved to the next block. And eventually it moved to the next block. They started calling in their friends every time they'd hear about a house being for sale. So they started selecting the people they wanted to bloom with. And so those are just very obvious but practical ways. How do we start creating those villages and intentional communities in the heart of what's already existing? Because the key is retrofit. It's not go out and build yourself something out in the woods again. I think it's all about retrofitting what we got now. And we can. And we can make these amazing, especially with the greenways. I mean, read the book A Pattern Language and greenways. The green is the divider. It's the room divider in the great house that houses us all. So that's it's a big piece of how do we create those mosaics of eco-villages where we are.
One piece that, and Dwayne, you've been doing this so long, I don't even know if you have to share this perspective anymore, but what I've seen you do is you show up and then you keep showing up and you keep showing up. I think there's a lot of folks who come into communities who come there a few times and then, you know, everybody doesn't just automatically embrace what they're doing and pick it up and carry it for them, and then they're like, oh, well, I guess those people didn't want it.
That's right. Perseverance.
That whole idea, I think, is wrong-headed. It's about being somewhere and being open and genuine and inclusive and working ceaselessly and showing up and continuing to show up in that determined fashion, that ceaselessly moving towards a goal at varying speeds, but ceaselessly taking steps in that direction. I've got an enormous amount of admiration for what you and Green Opportunity has been able to accomplish by showing up.
And just to build on that, as you show up, continue to refine your message. Continue to understand who's your audience and what matters to them. And begin to continue to not just say, hey, this matters to me, it should matter to you. So find out what matters to folks. So when I talk to folks in my neighborhood, I live in a transition neighborhood. There's folks that are white that are like me, that have been on the environmental consciousness for a long time, and there's folks who are from the traditional neighborhood we've got that history that Dwayne spoke of distrust, and that we don't have anything in common, and we have different priorities of need. So that was my Linking Waters project. The first thing is creating jobs, because in my neighborhood, people need jobs. And I need, more job. I have lots of, I have a ton of them, but, jobs is, so continue to hear your audience and talk about what they need in that compassionate way.
Just to add a little bit from my perspective, and that's so important, is just persistence and continuing to show up and being genuine in what you're presenting, and then, I guess just building on all that.
Thanks. This next question is for Michelle. What is Nasty Branch?
Great question. Nasty Branch is the urban stream that runs right through this neighborhood. I think its headwaters are actually on Town Mountain. Its original name, its official name, is Town Branch. It's been called Nasty Branch historically and colloquially in this neighborhood for as long as anybody I know can remember. It's called Nasty Branch, I think, for a lot of reasons. One having to do with racist land use planning, which involved, it's at the bottom of the hill. It was the black neighborhood, so it was the last neighborhood to get sewer and stormwater, things like that. And it flows directly into the French Broad River, about a half a mile from here. It's got, to me, it was a huge gift I didn't even know I was getting, because I was an environmentalist and I wanted to live in a house. So I was like, how do I buy a house and, control my energy footprint? That's kind of where I was still, at right then. And so I wanted a house that had full southern exposure right downtown. And that's what I got. And then I realized that the whole south side has beautiful southern exposure, relatively large green spaces, a stream. We learned about food forest ecology. Imagine Nasty Branch with nothing but food on its banks. I just go crazy when I think about it. But it's an urban stream, and it's a huge habitat for migratory birds in the spring and fall. It's a beautiful, cool place. And it's a place that it's hard to kind of physically get down to because it's steep and trashy and stuff. And so eventually we'll be able to go to Nasty Branch and be in it and be beside it and enjoy it as a community.
How polluted is it? What is the quality of the water?
It varies. It's pretty polluted. It gets a lot of soap. It gets, a lot of storm water. It's a very long stream. A lot of it is culverted. A lot of it's underground.
Catches almost all the road runoff from downtown Asheville.
It causes all the road. The watershed of Nasty Branch is quite big. But that's why the Linking Waters project is focused on a sub-basin of that watershed, which means one little area of slope that goes into the east side right in front of my house, that right there. That's where we want to put other demonstration sites in the neighborhood, and where we can start to measure all of that and really demonstrate what could be the effect on the stream, on the groundwater, on the pollution levels, on soil, on food growing, and then on job creation, on relationships of fairness and shared power. And we have a system of measuring that stuff too that's called whole measures. And I really encourage anybody who's in an organization, and I'll be encouraging the Transition Asheville to start to play around with this system called whole measures, because it measures the ethics behind land and water conservation, and how it helps or hurts helps or hurts relationships between people and between people and land. So that's Nasty Branch.
Is that called whole measure?
Whole, H-O-L-E-M-E. W-H-O. W-H. Whole measures.
Don't want any holes.
No holes. Whole measures. W-H-O-L-E measures And it's free. Anybody can use it. Anybody can download it. It's great for organizations and groups who are starting to plan and then want to evaluate what they're doing. It's secretly based on permaculture principles.
Thanks for that. This next question is for Gordon Smith. Is the Food Policy Council working actively with any beekeeper or pollinator stewardship organizations?
I'm trying to think if there's any representatives from those organizations involved, and I'm honestly not sure. It's obviously something that's really important and that's been growing in popularity here in the city as far as people keeping bees and recognizing that we have to recognize the health of those pollinators is going to be a huge chunk of the health of the ecosystem. So while I've been seeing more bee boxes pop up, I'm not sure if there's anyone directly represented, so please come and be that voice and help us understand how all that fits in, because we need all those voices within our organizational ecosystem.